Hello and welcome to the Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games interview series. Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games is a group dedicated to all things about mobile accessible gaming. And through our interview series, we tend to interview game developers about creating accessible games, but we also interview accessibility influencers about the state of accessibility in gaming. And today we have one of the best out there. We have Brandon Cole, who is an accessibility influencer. And as we've been joking, he's been in the room when they've talked about accessibility. So we're going to have a great conversation with him today. Welcome.
One of the best. Wow, what an introduction.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, thanks. I appreciate that. It's an honor to be considered the upper echelon of this type of work. I mean, I hear it from other people as well, but it's still one of those things that it's difficult to fully accept, like, you know, that I've gone this far. But yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, and for those who may, well, we're going to have it in the links, in the description of this interview. But Brandon has a Twitter page. There's lots of great information that you'll get out there about accessibility and the things that he's working on. That's actually how I first got tuned into you. So lots of great information found out there. I recommend everybody go to the link in the description and get connected to you. But why don't we just start right here at the beginning and tell people a little bit about your journey of how you got from start to where you are today, which is, as I kind of mentioned, you're a person who's been in the room of AAA studios talking about game accessibility. How did we get there?
Well, I think if you want to go through the entire journey, I have to start when I was a young child, about 6 or 7 years old. And this is a story I love to tell to all the people I speak to. And my brother, my older brother, who is about 5 years older than me, asked me if I wanted to play Super Mario Brothers on our Nintendo Entertainment System. And at the time, even as a 6-year-old, I kind of had this idea about video games. Even then, I thought to myself, well, they had the word video in them. That means I can't play them, because video means you have to see that, right? So somehow he convinced me to do it. I don't actually remember how he did the final convincing, but he convinced me to do it. And we went into the room where Nintendo was located, and he hands me the controller, and he fires up the game, and we begin to play. And before you know it, I'm breaking bricks, collecting coins, getting extra lives, defeating bosses, saving princesses. It's a miracle. I can't believe I'm actually doing this. And somehow I beat the entire game on my first ever attempt. It's amazing. How could I have possibly done this? And then, as the gaming ending music was playing, my wonderful, wonderful brother revealed the punchline of the joke, which was that he had handed me the absolutely, completely unplugged second player controller while he played the entire game.
Now, was he doing it as a practical joke, or was he actually trying to inspire you?
No. Definitely practical joke. He was yucking it up when he told me this.
Yeah.
And the thing is,
I
at
hope
the
you had
time,
enough
I was
sight
crushed
to
by this.
sock him.
No, I've been totally blind all my life, so no, not at all. But I was pretty crushed by this at the time. I thought I had done something really cool, and I hadn't done anything. Like, literally, I'd done nothing. I just stood there and hit buttons while he did everything. But at the same time that I was feeling bad about it, I was angry, just angry enough that I made a little teeny tiny vow back then. And the only thing that I vowed back then was that one day I would beat a game without his help. That's all it was back then.
Right.
But then what that led to was, I just kind of started trying games. I just mess around with games. Even if I couldn't play them, I would try them anyway.
Now, are these all Nintendo games, or did you start going to the PC where there might have been a little bit more accessibility at that time? Or
mostly Nintendo at first, mostly Nintendo and Super Nintendo in the early days. But I would just try a whole bunch of games. I remember trying Double Dragon for regular Nintendo. I remember trying RoboCop and getting literally nowhere, dying immediately. There's a lot of experiences, but what I started to learn was that there were patterns to some of these things, and that, I learned the properties of video game sound. I learned that each sound meant something.
Right.
And if I could figure out what that was, sometimes I could find workarounds to get through certain parts of games. One of my proudest moments in the early days was getting through a room in Metal Gear Solid 1 for the original PlayStation, the PlayStation 1. There's a room that is crisscrossed entirely with infrared beams. And if you break any of the beams, the doors slam shut and you die because there's gas that floods the room.
Okay.
So you cannot, there's no, if you break the beams, there's no escape. So you have to get through the whole room without breaking a single infrared beam. Well, the beams make no sound at all. Of course, they're infrared beams. They don't need to make a sound. But the thing is, I learned through kind of basically tons and tons of trial and error and just figuring things out. I figured out how many steps I could take before getting hit, when to pause, when to crawl instead of walk to get under a beam.
Right.
I just figured it all out. I broke the room down and figured it out, and I got through it. And that's probably one of my proudest moments in a non-accessible game in the early days. But anyway, this led to me constantly thinking about this stuff because I was trying games all the time, and that did eventually go to PC and other consoles as well. Because I was always trying things, and sometimes I was successful, and sometimes I wasn't. Because I was always trying, I always had ideas. I always had thoughts. How could this game be accessible? I'm really struggling with this, but what would I need to not struggle with this? And I actually didn't realize this until many years later, but I was kind of an accessibility consultant in my head for a very long time.
Just
because
no one
I
listening
had those
to you
ideas. Right. I had those ideas. I had those thoughts. And it wasn't until about 2005 that my now fiance said, I love putting it this way, said 3 words that changed my life, and they're not the ones you're thinking of. She said,
I was going to go with 4.
Said,
but...
okay, fair enough. But she said, you should blog.
You should blog.
And that was, you should blog is what she said to me. And she said that because she had noticed that I would tell her these things that I was thinking when she would play a game. So she played games for me, which is very nice for her. She games I can't play, she will play for me so I can get that experience, at least get that experience.
I thought she was going like, I'm sick of hearing you. Just write it down and tell somebody else.
Not at all. Not at all. No, she has always been the kind of person that sees in me more than I see in myself, but that's entirely another story. But she noticed that I would talk about this stuff, and she was like, there really is no resource for this. Like, you think developers should do these things, but they don't know at all that they should do these things.
Right.
Like, and no one is really telling them.
Did you say that was 2015?
No, 2005.
Yeah, well, definitely.
2005.
No one's talking about it then, right?
Back then, accessibility was not a large part of the conversation. I mean, there were, obviously accessibility talks have been happening since, for decades now, but it's been a very small part of the overall conversation until fairly recently.
Yeah, I feel like 2005 would be more like something was unintentionally accessible as opposed to on purposely accessible.
Yeah, that would be an accurate statement. But I mean, like, there was the occasional game that was released with accessibility in mind. It was very, very rare back then, but it did actually happen now and again. There was an Xbox 360 game called In the Pit, which was made for the blind. It was it was the only one ever that was released in the Xbox 360. But there you go. Anyway, moving on. So she told me I should blog, told me I should write all this stuff down. So I started doing that, and I will say I did it poorly at first. I would post a post every couple months. Like, I wasn't very good at it. I wasn't very good at keeping up with it. But apparently I was just good enough because in 2014, yes, it was many years later, 2014, I get an email from a guy named Brian Schmidt, who is a mobile game developer, inviting me to be on a panel about mobile game accessibility. And he wanted me to be the gamer perspective of that panel.
Okay.
The panel featured a bunch of mobile game developers that had added accessibility to their games in some fashion. The developer of Zombies Run was there. The developer of the Mud client, the mobile Mud client called MudRammer was there. That's also accessible.
Right.
So basically, that was the idea, and
so that's really the fruit of that. The fruit of being asked to be on this panel really just came from you putting yourself out there and putting your ideas out there, as opposed to
just writing things down.
Because I mean, so many people, like you said, kind of just think about it on their own, or take advantage of the accessibility features, but they're not really out there advocating, promoting, analyzing, advocating for. I mean, you took that extra step the first time when you started that blog, right?
Yeah, that's true. So I did that panel, and that panel was co-moderated by the one, the only Ian Hamilton, who I'm sure you've heard of. Most people have. One of the greatest accessibility advocates of all time.
Where was that physically, that conference, just out of curiosity?
That was at GDC 2014. It was in San Francisco.
Okay.
So Ian Hamilton co-moderated that, and he apparently really liked my speech that day, because I would get contacted by him after the whole thing was over, and he would invite me to then, 3 years later, be one of the very first speakers at the Game Accessibility Conference in 2017, the very first GA Conf in 2017. He invited me to speak there, and I graciously accepted that. I was delighted that he invited me to that, and that's when things started to slide into place for me. That's when I first started having the thought that maybe, just maybe, there was something in all this. So I go to the conference. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, just going back to that conference, I mean, just think of how far you come from 2005, and not just you, but just like the whole accessibility discussion, right? From 2005, where there's nothing out there, to 2017, there is a dedicated conference about gaming accessibility.
First ever,
I mean,
exactly.
That's a pretty amazing progression forward.
Before GA Conf, people that want to talk about accessibility needed to rely on GDC's very, very small accessibility track. They have one. They still have it, as far as I know, but it's really kind of the minor set of panels every year. But anyway, at that conference, there was one particular move that I made that basically created my career. And what it was this. So before we all spoke that day, Ian wanted to make sure that everyone who was there, who was speaking there, knew who was in the audience. He wanted people to know who were represented there. And so he told me, among other people, he told me a bunch of people, but among the people that he told me was that a little tiny studio called Naughty Dog was represented there.
Right.
They are not, spoiler alert, a little tiny studio.
Right. I mean, for those people who might not know, tell them what some of the games Naughty Dog has done.
Naughty Dog is a long-running developer. They started they started a long time ago. They are well known for games like Crash Bandicoot, the original one, Jak and Daxter, and the Uncharted games, and most recently the Last of Us series.
Right.
So very, 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 very large developer nowadays. So they were represented in the audience, and knowing that, I did my speech, and I included in my discussion about accessibility and what I would love to see and where I would love accessibility to go, and all these sentimental things about man, I would love to play this game and that game. I included the little phrase, what I wouldn't give to play a game like The Last of Us. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the moment. That is the moment. It's actually in the recording of that speech. I believe you can very, very, very faintly hear one of the Naughty Dog representatives in the audience, who's right in the front row, going, "Oh, we need to talk to this guy."
Right.
So,
and they did.
They did. They pulled me aside after the speech was over for about an hour, and we just talked. It was very general back then. We just talked about, what an accessible game looks like, and we even we talked about, like, okay, what would it take to make one of our games accessible? But very, very generally speaking, like nothing was specific at that moment. And even then, I was very happy with that, and I felt like I had achieved something. But even then, I didn't actually know what was happening. It wasn't until the email that I got 2 weeks later inviting me down to the studio to basically make my speech again to the entire studio team, that things really clicked into place for me, and I realized what opportunity that I had. And I knew that going
how
there.
old are you at 2017? How old are you getting in front of all these people and giving that speech?
2017, I am 31.
31. Okay.
31. Yep. Yeah. So, but I've never had a problem with public speaking, though. I was born for public speaking, I think. But anyway, so I knew that going to that studio, I knew that I wasn't just trying to convince them to make the game accessible. I knew that what my real job was, and this is how I approached the whole thing, was to sell myself as the one who could help them do that. And that's how I approached that whole interview. And well, long story short, and I've taken a lot of time with this question, but a long story short, I succeeded. And I worked on The Last of Us 2 for 3 years. And now we have a AAA game that is fully accessible to the totally blind, whose influence is now being felt across the gaming industry.
Yeah.
And I can't believe I'm able to say this because it's a huge honor for me, but I've already received confirmation. I actually did not work on it directly, but I received confirmation that the upcoming God of War Ragnarok for PlayStation 4 and 5 has accessibility features that were influenced by my work on The Last of Us 2. So the influence of the previous work I've done is already making its way across the industry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, again, for those who don't know, who might, because again, a lot of the people listening to this might be a little bit more mobile focused.
On the mobile side. Yeah, I understand.
But the Last of Us, which is a great open world game in a post-apocalyptic setting, they incorporated, I think it was over 60 accessibility
60
features.
plus.
Yeah, where you can toggle in, whether, kind of dependent on what your issue is. You could have where you only have to press the button once as opposed to rapidly tap it, or you might have larger text or color contrast, or reorientation towards a goal by pressing a certain combination of buttons to help keep you on the path. I mean, they really tried to incorporate everything, and as you said, maybe the first AAA game that is really fully accessible without any sort of sighted assistance from start to finish for a blind player.
It is, yeah. It's the only one so far.
Now,
there will soon be more.
When you worked for them for 3 years, did you physically go to their location? Or are you doing it remotely? How does that relationship work?
It actually worked both ways. I did a lot of emailing back and forth with different members of the team while I was at home. But every now and then they would be like, "Hey, we need you back here again," and they would fly me back down to LA to the studio, and we would do some work. And what that looked like was a couple days I would stay there, and I would go into the studio one of the work days, and we would start the day with discussing what I would be going through that day, talking about the progress they had made since the last time I was there, and so on and so forth. And then I would test for a little bit. I'd play the game in its current state, whatever that was. Mm-hmm. And then we would talk about that. We'd talk about it a little bit while I was playing it, but we would talk about it more after I'd finished whatever section they had hooked up for me. And we would discuss, what worked, what didn't work, what needed to be changed. We would talk about new features that needed to be added. There came a time, as things got later, and this is the way game development works. The later it gets, the less opportunity you have to add features to a game.
Yes.
So as time went on, we couldn't add as much, but we could fix what was there.
Right.
So we did that, and it just kept working like that. It was a brainstorming session, testing sessions, talking to multiple members of the entire team. I was told near the end of the project that there was not a single person on that team who did not touch accessibility in some way, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Honestly, that is pretty cool. Yeah. So yeah, that's how that worked.
There is one thing that that I thought about, but then I actually heard that somebody is doing it, and I've reached out to this company to see if I can get them to talk about it. But it was basically to add audio description to the game. So you walk into a room, and like in a movie, where someone would audio describe to you what the scene is that's before you, you would get a little bit of that in the video game world as well. So, as you're walking around in apocalyptic wasteland in Last of Us, it would kind of describe to you, you're walking into a village, here's what it looks like, to kind of help you, picture the world in your mind, if you will, since you can't do it with your own two eyes. I think that's a very interesting place where, how can we take it from where it is now to kind of that next level to make it an even fuller experience. I'm really interested in, trying to get this guy to join the interview series to talk about his efforts at that. Have you had any experience with, that potential development?
Here's what I'll say on that. First of all, I will say that it is something that I'm interested in as well. It's something that I'm also advocating for on my side. And I will also say, as a bit of a tease, you may not have to wait very long.
Mm-hmm.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, I know he's doing this. His company's already been doing it for some games. I don't think they announced what the games were, but yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see, hopefully some AAA games come out with that.
I can't be specific, but I will say that audio description will be a thing in video games in the future. I will say that.
Now, Brandon, we've talked about Naughty Dog, a AAA console, PlayStation game that you worked on, but you've also worked in the mobile area as well. So why don't you tell the community a little bit about your experience there and who you've worked for, what you've done, what accessibility did you add to their particular game?
Yeah, so the first mobile client that I got was a developer out of Australia who was working on a tabletop dice roller for the blind.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to be as accessible as possible. The app was called Ready to Roll, and I worked with them to perfect the gestures that you would use as a blind person to roll your dice easily.
What is this for, like doing like Dungeons and Dragons or something? Or,
yes, yeah, it'd be for tabletop games of that nature. So you basically choose. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say you choose what sided dice you might want, and then roll it, that sort of thing.
And then how many you want to roll, and that sort of thing. Yeah, that was the idea. Okay. Unfortunately, I can't prove that anymore because unfortunately that app was taken down. That developer went through some difficult times and had to take down that app. So that app no longer exists. So I always mention it, but sadly I cannot prove it because the app is not there anymore. But I did work on a game that many of you may know of in the mobile gaming space. If you have played the most recent versions of a game called 7 Little Words, mm-hmm. I was their accessibility consultant on that project for the Unity version. So for those who don't realize this, because hopefully you don't realize it, but if you do, that's fine. But the idea was it'd be a fairly seamless transition. They switched engines a couple versions ago. They were using a kind of out-of-the-box accessible. I believe they were basically just using Voiceover built-in stock stuff, or not Voiceover, iPhone built-in stock stuff to build their game before. They made the switch to Unity. Ooh. And discovered, of course, switching to Unity, that it's not accessible by default.
Right.
But they did find out about the Unity accessibility plugin. So they got that and they started utilizing that, and they reached out to me to make sure their accessibility worked at least on par with the original game. Of course, me being me, I had to try to improve it a little bit.
Sure.
So I did. And that's why you have features like the ability to read the current clue that you have, or the current word that you have as far as you have it, letter by letter. Right. And you can read clues letter by letter now, which you couldn't do before. All this to try to maintain a fair playing field for the blind and the sighted. So there you go. But yeah, those are my mobile projects that I've worked on so far. Hopefully there'll be more. Unity
has been a log jam, if you will, or a sticking point, because again, as you said, Unity doesn't have that kind of built-in accessibility. A lot of people I've talked to have done games on Unity say, well, we have to kind of home build our accessibility features. Yep. Have you heard anything out of Unity saying, we hear this cry for accessibility, it's becoming more mainstream, we are going to do more about making Unity as a base program that creates games
actually, yes, we have. Not that long ago, I believe it was a month or two ago, something like that, Unity officially announced that they're adding the functionality to add accessibility to their games natively, and they demonstrated it as well. They have a video online, which I don't have the link off the top of my head, but they have a video online of them building a little Unity game just as a demo and showing how to add accessibility to it for developers so they can, understand how it works. But yeah, they have officially announced it.
Do you know if that's going to help any game retroactively, or is it going to be kind of this works for games that are being created now forward?
It does require work from the developer. So if a game is not currently being updated anymore, it probably won't work accessibly. It's not going to work on its own.
Right.
But if the developer chooses to do the work, then yeah, they could make it work.
Now, in all of your kind of accessibility consulting, I mean, you're not coding. You are more kind of talking from the user experience standpoint and giving feedback on that and giving suggestions. Make it do this. However you do that coding wise, and that would help.
So I am absolutely the idea guy, but I will tell you this. This work has taught me things. So I'm not saying that I could code, but what I am saying is I understand concepts within game development now much more than I used to. And that knowledge is something that I can utilize to come up with more ideas, So it is helping me every time I do work for a developer. I learn something about how games are made, and it helps me come up with more and better ideas, more feasible, but also ideas that do what we want them to do. And I think that's one of my strengths is I know that there as awesome as game development is, there are still constraints there. And in learning what those are, I can come up with outside the box solutions for things that we need to happen in the game.
Those, whether it be the mobile games or a AAA studio like Naughty Dog, I mean, I assume that since they brought you in, they're very receptive to what you're saying and trying to accomplish what your suggestions are. Or have you felt any, roadblocks or any walls put up, where it feels like, well, we just have him in here to check a box and we'll do what we can, but we're not really going to go out of our way. I mean, I imagine it's the former rather than the latter, but I mean, what is as you've been in the room?
I would say it's more of the former. However, I will also say that adversity is not something that is certainly something I've had to deal with. Even at Naughty Dog. Yes, that's right. I said it. I've talked about this before, so it's fine. And actually, the guy that was involved in this talked about it too. We had some doubters at Naughty Dog even after my original speech. Not everyone was doubting. Most people were very happy with it, but we had some doubters after our original speech, and one of them was the primary audio director on the project. He was like, "I don't know. This seems like a lot. I don't really think we can do this. It requires so much time and so much work, and I don't think we can do it."
I feel like the audio guy would be the one person on your side.
Well, you'd think
job
that.
Security.
but no. But it's fine. Like he was new to the idea, and what he told me afterwards is that it took seeing us, us being the accessibility consultants. There were 7 of us total. I was very specifically the blindness accessibility consultant. There were 7 of us total for other disabilities as well, which is why there are 60 features in that game. But anyway, he said that it took seeing us play test the game, and especially me, because his concern was the audio, and I was telling him to make all these audio cues. This is what we needed, all these audio cues. Right. And it took him seeing us, and especially me, play the game to make him go, "Oh, if we do this, we're doing something great." And that he was locked in after that. And he's talked about that too. We've had a lot of discussion about that, about how he's one of the success stories, one of the turnarounds. I'm glad that he got on board, and I'm glad. And I made sure once the game was released, I made sure to message him every time I found a really nice little audio thing that he did.
Right.
Because there's a lot of little touches in that game that make it really immersive, even if you're blind. Like the fact that when you replace your ammo in your flamethrower, you can hear the previous canister drop to the ground. And if you move in the right direction, in the direction that the canister dropped onto, you can kick it.
Right.
And it makes the sound appropriately. And it's I know it's a little tiny touch, but it's just really, really cool.
Well, and positive feedback goes a long way. It makes
Oh
people
yeah.
feel good to do it again. So,
Yeah.
you know, along those lines, and maybe again, my group is primarily blind and visually impaired people.
Sure.
So how many Brandon Coles are out there who are doing this type of accessibility work? I mean, I imagine you kind of run in a circle and see the same people, you know, at conferences
Yeah.
and on panels and at studios. You know, how many are out there doing this type of work?
When it comes to blind consultants, there actually really aren't that many. There are, in fact, there are really only 2 totally blind consultants, including myself, that I know of. Sightless Combat being the other one, and the low vision group has a much higher group, you know, higher number right now. Steve Saylor's in that group. James Rath is in that group, among others. So yeah, yeah.
And have you
It's a
worked with all
small
of them?
niche thing. I have worked with actually no, that's not true. I haven't worked with Sightless Combat yet, but I've worked with all the other ones that I mentioned.
And so, you know, the besides doing this consulting work, you know, you have some other, you know, ventures that you're out there. Like I said, I've seen you on Twitter posting things. You know, why don't you tell
Yeah.
people some of the other content that you're putting out where they can find you and learn about accessibility and you know what's coming down the pipeline, you know, maybe about this
Yeah.
audio
So
description.
yeah. So I do a lot of stuff. I do a bunch of stuff. And a lot of it is to serve the purpose of advocating for accessibility as well. So I do post a lot on Twitter. I talk about accessibility there. My most recent big rant was about people who were just dismissing the commentary edition to Street Fighter 6, which is a good thing, not a bad thing, despite what some even other blind people are saying. So I did a rant on that on Twitter. I also have a blog. So twitter.com/superblindman is my Twitter. I'm Super Blind Man almost everywhere. I'm Super Blind Man on Twitch and Twitter and YouTube. And I do want to talk about Twitch and YouTube for a second, because the reason I post those videos is, again, everything is meant to feed into everything else. That's the way I see things.
Right.
And I do Twitch and YouTube to show sighted people as well as other blind people things that we can play, and even things that we can't play. But what I try to do with things that we can't play is encourage discussion. So I do live accessibility reviews of random games. Like, I will just try to get a developer to kind of sign on and get me a copy of a game on, you know, on or near release day. And if they agree to it, I will do a live accessibility review of that game, whether or not I can play it. If it takes 20 minutes of me fumbling around and doing nothing, then that's what it is. But then, instead of being negative about it and saying, "Oh, this experience sucked, it was terrible, I hate it," instead, what we do is we go through and we talk about what worked, what was good, what were the positives if there were any, and what were the negatives. What could be changed, and how could we change it? How could this game be accessible? We do what I did in my head when I was a kid. We do it live. And
when you say we, is there more than you involved in that?
Yeah. So I stream this live. So I involve my entire Twitch chat. Okay. I tell everyone to come in and bring their positivity, and we're going to do this. We're going to talk about it. We're not going to say it sucks. We're going to talk about it. We're going to see what we can do to try to make it better. If it works, great, then great. But if it doesn't, what could be done to make it better? Let's focus on that. And then what I do is I will try to link the developer back to those videos so they can see that, and hopefully, you know, it has an effect on them. Even if it doesn't mean they'll fix this game, that is not necessarily the goal. We'll tell them how this game could be made better, but the important thing is to think about the future. So if they see this video and say, well, unfortunately, we can't support this game to that level because it would require too much redoing. I understand that. It happens all the time. It takes much more effort to add accessibility to an existing game than it does to build one for accessibility, you know, with accessibility in mind.
Well, that's where you pitch, bring me in early so I can.
Exactly. So yeah, but you know, if they apply what they learned from the video that we made to their next game, then we've still won. Right. You know, so that's the goal, and that has led to some conversations, and some developers attending my Twitch streams. I have had developers in my Diablo 3 streams. I've had developers in my Hearthstone streams. I've had developers in my streams of Ubisoft games, multiple times. it's been good. It's been successful, and you know, success is however you define it, really. Like, you know, I don't have 1 million subscribers. You know, I don't get 1 million or 5 million views on a video. You know, but that's
But who's
it's still
watching is
successful to
important.
me.
Yeah.
Right, right. It's still successful to me because it is still making an impact on the right people.
Right.
So
You
so
know,
yeah, you know, you're all welcome to come in there and join me live or watch my content on YouTube. Again, it's Super Blind Man on YouTube and on Twitter and Twitch and basically everywhere.
yeah, and
And check out my website
we'll have all
and
those
all the
links in the
links.
description of this YouTube video too. For those who don't want to memorize it, you will go to the description, you press the link as well.
Yep.
You know what I find really interesting, and I've been thinking about this and tossing it around for some content that I'm going to put out. But you know, if you look back, you go back to that 2005 timeframe. You know, it probably started with some accessibility accidentally, as some blind people try to play games, and you know, were able to get through some of it. You know, later on, as we kind of advance a little bit forward in the years, I think you have kind of the more kind of a grassroots indie gamers who are, or developers, I should say, who are, I've put my game out and I just want more people to play this. And if there's a blind person out there who wants to play this, well, I'll make some tweaks because I just want,
Yep.
you know, one more person to play.
Yeah.
And that has, you know, advanced now to where we've got the attention of AAA developers. And again, the Naughty Dog in particular, I mean, that was a big push to push, you know, the thought of accessibility and not just blind and visually impaired, but you know, all sorts of disabilities in playing games forward into the forefront of let's think about this at the outset of creation of our games. And that has been, you know, a pretty, you know, drastic, you know, shift that has occurred. But I really find it interesting that it, you know, it didn't start with AAA developers with loads of money talking about accessibility. It started with little developers, you know, thinking about how do I get my game to just a few more people, and you know, where's
Yeah.
a niche that I can carve out for myself, and that's really where this groundswell, you know, originated from.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. A lot of accessibility came from indie developers. A lot of inspiration for features that I've helped to design came from audio games.
Yep.
You know, which are typically made by small teams of 1 or 2 people sometimes, and you know, they inspired some features that I helped to create. So, you know, more props to them too. You know.
Now, where do you see as kind of maybe the most potential for accessibility? You know, now that we got the attention of AAA developers, do you think, you know, the future, you know, 5-10 years from now, the great blind or visually impaired gaming experience is going to be on the PlayStation or the Xbox, or do you think it's, you know, going to be the computer, or do you think it's going to be, you know, still kind of mobile phones because of, you know, embedded screen reader software that's already in there that makes, you know, a lot of games, you know, more accessible with less work, you know, so that, you know, we get more games, you know, from that platform. I mean, where do you see the future of accessibility where, you know, maybe I want to start a page about, you know, blind console gaming, because that's where the future is going to be 5 years from now.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think the mobile gaming market is pretty stable as far as accessibility goes. I don't necessarily, I don't know. Well, hopefully, in an ideal world, the Unity plugin blows up, the Unity accessibility thing, where Unity is adding their accessibility natively. Hopefully, that blows up, and a lot more games are accessible on mobile. Hopefully, that happens. I want to believe that'll happen. But if I were to answer right now, just based on the knowledge that I have, the information that I have, I would honestly have to say, it looks to me anyway, like PlayStation is gonna be the big push. And the reason I say that is because I'm not just saying that because PlayStation has Last of Us 2, which of course it does, and Xbox does not because it is a PlayStation exclusive. But I am saying it because PlayStation has already taken what they've learned from Last of Us 2 and applied it to other things.
Yep.
They took some steps with Spider-Man Miles Morales and the remastered Spider-Man from 2018, which was re-released in 2021 with the PS5, or 2020 rather, with the PS5. They took some inspiration from that, or they took some inspiration from Last of Us 2 and applied it to that game. Even though it's not fully accessible, they took steps towards that. And that's a different internal developer called Insomniac that made that.
Yeah, but I think that the key word there is it's an internal developer. So I mean, there is, you know, as opposed to Naughty Dog maybe walling off what it's learned and its accessibility features, I am sure there is some sharing going on between
Oh, there absolutely is.
those internal houses, that.
Yeah. So what I was about to say was now we have God of War Ragnarok, who's being made by Sony Santa Monica.
Right.
God of War Ragnarok. Again, I already got confirmation that some of the features that I worked on inspired the accessibility features that are going to be in Ragnarok. But even more than that, you can actually hear, even already, you can actually hear the fact that there was sharing going on. Because if you watch the about 3-second video that Sony Santa Monica made announcing that there would be audio cues in God of War Ragnarok, you will very quickly note, if you have played or heard The Last of Us 2 played by a blind person, the audio cue that is in the God of War Ragnarok video is one from The Last of Us 2. So it looks like they just did a very direct swap.
Right.
And the thing is,
they should, just leverage it.
Sure, why not?
Don't need to recreate the wheel if you got something that's working,
Yeah, exactly. Don't fix what's not broken. But so the thing is, a lot of people think the accessibility revolution for the blind is going to be on Xbox, and a lot of people think that because Xbox has a huge accessibility marketing campaign. And I'm not saying they're doing no work. They certainly are. Like they've they released the Xbox Adaptive Controller. They have done a lot of work to make some of their games accessible to certain disabilities. But honestly, and this is some honesty from your man here. Honestly, Xbox has done kind of little work for the blind. They've added narration to some games, but most of the time the narration is incomplete. And even where the narration is complete, there's no other features to back it up. So you can hear everything narrated, but you still can't play the game because you can't click on this or move to this spot or find this objective.
Yeah, that might be a little over leveraging their PC screen reader, capability type of thing, and not putting the meat behind it.
Right. It's just using the narrator API, which they already have, and applying that, and basically nothing else. Right. So at least as far as blindness is concerned, like I said, they've done a lot of work with other disabilities. There's a lot of motor impairment features. Their co-pilot feature was a great idea, so on and so forth. But for blindness, not so much. Now, PlayStation has done The Last of Us 2, and PlayStation Studios, in my experience, and again, this is all my opinion. You're welcome to disagree with it if you want. But PlayStation Studios are a fantastic group of studios who are basically given carte blanche. And what I mean by that is the reason that Naughty Dog was able to make The Last of Us 2 what it was is because Sony, as a corporation, didn't get in the way and said, if you want to do this and you believe in it, do it. And they let them have the time. I mean, heck, Last of Us 2 was delayed, 3-4 times? Right. They let them have the time. They let them have the people. They let them have the space to build it out.
Well, I mean, so let's just talk about, time and investment versus return. So you put this time into the 60 features of accessibility, but how much free press did they get about that game? Just free advertising of people talking about it, across all sorts of platforms on, mainstream news stations and things like that. I mean, that probably got a decent return for the investment that they put in. Plus, they did something, great for gamers who, have different abilities. So, and now they can leverage that. Next game we're putting out, again, here we are with, being the leader in accessibility. I think it's just good press.
Yeah, it's not only that. I mean, it is good press, but even on top of all that, not only did the game do well in terms of profit, but it also is, to this day, the most awarded game of all time. Mm-hmm. The Last of Us 2, the most awarded game of all time. And I'm happy to say that some of those awards, not just one, not just some of those awards are related to its accessibility. Right. Which is why, to this day, I now call myself an award-winning accessibility consultant.
Very good. Now, do you think the biggest roadblock around accessibility still is just awareness? Again, hopefully over time, as developers work on games and move to other games, they kind of bring what they learned about accessibility and the early adoption of accessibility to the beginning structures and creation of a game. But are we still at the infancy of that, and the developers that have had exposure to accessibility and seen the success of integrating accessibility? Is this really still a lack of knowledge game that we're trying to work our way through.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's accurate, because we still have developers today who they want to implement accessibility, but in a lot of ways they don't know what we need. The problem is some developers think that they do know what we need, and a lot of times they're wrong. So what that creates is a problem where a developer might cost things out based on what they think they know, and decide it's too much and decide against accessibility in development. It happened with Rockstar Games. A few years ago, there was an article that I hate, an article that I infamously hate, where Rockstar said that to make Grand Theft Auto 5 accessible, it would cost them $128 million. Now, would it cost them money? Yes, it would. Of course it would. It would cost the developers time. It would be a lot of recoding. 100%, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I also agree that at this point, there's no point in making GTA 5 accessible because it is not a new game. It would be too much. It would be a lot of time and effort, be a lot of work. It would be, if work on GTA 6, maybe make that accessible, So I agree with all that. But do I personally believe that it would cost them $128 million to make that game accessible? No, I do not. I do not believe that for a single second.
Well, I mean, even that's kind of half of the equation too. Like, okay, sure, maybe it's going to cost you whatever. It doesn't matter what the number is. Let's just say 120 million. But how many sales are you going to get? Worldwide, do you get 1 million blind players or disabled players who suddenly are like, wait, I can play this game, and therefore will go out and buy it? And you make 1 million sales, and you make $60 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah, $60 million. Or these days, and if it's on PS5, you make $70 million because games are now more expensive now.
Right. So, I mean, we can't just say only the expense aspect. And I don't know, would you even draw even more people who suddenly say, wait, I can participate. I cannot be, forgotten about or less than. I can have the same experience or as close to thereof of an experience of everybody else who's playing that game. I mean, that's, particularly in the games that I've played that have been, fully accessible. What I've really enjoyed about those, particular games is that they've created an even playing experience. I can play certain games, that I know, I'll pick one, Football Chairman Pro on the iPhone. I'm having this exact same experience on that game as a sighted person. I can talk to somebody about that game, and you wouldn't know that I was a blind player playing and they were a sighted person playing. It is the same experience. And there's something, enriching about being able to do that and not being like, oh, you played this and that was great and I have no idea what you're talking about because I can't play it, it's not accessible to me. Or even the experience I experienced was not that experience because you had a visual experience and I had a non-visual experience, which might fundamentally change a game in some ways. But there is a lot to say that I think you might draw in a lot of people to go buy a PlayStation and say, I'm going to play this game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot to say. I think Rockstar, I really think they acted without thinking, without really thinking it through, without doing any real research, without consulting anyone or asking anyone what they would actually need in terms of disabilities. So I've never liked that article. I never liked that they released that statement in response to, will this game ever be made accessible? You got to go.
You got to go send them a consulting pitch book for the next game.
Yeah,
we got to get you in there. We got to get you in the room.
That's exactly the thing, though. I say that because I've always been an honest person. I've always been very candid too. Like, I will stand up for the rights of the blind gaming community to have an experience that they deserve. But I will also do what I can to fix it. So 100%, after all the things I've just said, if I got the chance, I will work with Rockstar. Because it is nothing but an opportunity to make it better.
Right.
So I will do it.
I love those guys. I played up through GTA 5 because, as I said, I only went blind 3 years ago. So I love those games. Those were fun games. But I mean, even with like Last of Us. So I played the original Last of Us, one of my all-time favorite games. Last of Us 2, I struggled with because I was newly blind when it came out, and I was really kind of stuck in this is not a visual experience. I'm missing a lot. And
I understand that.
And it actually, depressed me. I mean, like I give so much credit to what they did and all the features that they put in, but my own, singular individual experience was, for me, it suddenly felt like, like a remembrance of what I was missing out on. Just
Yeah, I
6
can
months
respect that.
ago. Yeah, just 6 months ago, and that's I put the controller down, the console controller down, and I focused in on playing games on the iPhone because there was just a little bit more accessibility and a little bit more manageable, particularly being newly blind. Doing something a little bit more complex, like trying to operate a controller in a 3D space, was maybe just a little bit beyond.
Yeah, even
what
I will admit, as proud as I am of Last of Us 2, even I'll admit it's not a good starter game.
Right, exactly. That was my
If you've
problem.
never
This is
done
not
it before.
right. Like maybe the what's that? The Shadow of the Veil. Like maybe I should start with something like that as a console experience.
Yeah, Shadow of the Crown, the Veil,
Shadow.
Shadow of the Crown.
Yeah. So I'm interested in maybe coming back to the console one day when they've fleshed out some of the kinks, and it's maybe I need someone like you to come sit in your living room and have you show me how to do it, because
Well,
I think I get frustrated a little too early again, because I'm tapping back into a visual experience, which then it has a different connotation. The whole experience has a different kind of feel to it.
Sure. Well, the thing is, these days, that kind of thing can be done remotely. PlayStation has a feature called Share Play. So if ever you actually wanted to do something like that, it actually would technically be possible.
Is that a PS5 or is that on the 4 as well?
It's on 4 and 5.
On
4 and 5 both have the Share Play feature.
So. Yeah, I did not buy a 5 because I was right. That came out after I lost my Switch. So.
Yeah, fair enough.
So let's talk about the community, the gaming blind community. We obviously want more games to play. We have some great people such as yourself and Steve Saylor and others who are out there, working with studios, talking about accessibility. But what can the average gamer do, or the average person who would like to see more games? What can they do to get out there to, have their voices heard? Where is their outlet to do that?
Well, the good news is that a lot more studios have started paying attention to accessibility. And because a lot more studios have started paying attention, there are now a lot more accessibility contacts that exist out there now. Certain publishers and studios have their own accessibility email addresses. So if you have your own accessibility feedback on a game, and again, when you do this, try to remember that the features that you suggest may not be applied to the current game, but you should still do it.
And also be nice.
Yes. But the accessibility emails are out there. EA has one, I believe. I wish I knew all the email addresses off the top of my head, but they're out there. EA has one. Square Enix has one. Let's see. Ubisoft has one. There are others as well. I know I'm missing some, and I feel bad about it. but yes, a lot more studios have those emails. So use those where possible. If a developer has an email address for accessibility, utilize it. Send them an email. Send them your feedback, whatever it is. As long as you can, remain positive about it. Don't just be like, "This game is not accessible. It sucks."
Right.
Tell them why. Tell them what your struggles are.
Give suggestions.
That's what they.
Be nice.
Yeah. Yes. Tell them what your struggles are. Make sure they know what the issue is, and tell them how. If you have any ideas for how they could improve it, make sure they know what those are. And maybe it won't be applied to that current game, but maybe next time a new game comes around, your idea will have been implemented and things will be even better. So that's one way. The other way is just to be out there, kind of like I was. Social media is a much larger thing these days. So just getting yourself out there on social media could help. A lot of game studios have social media contacts as well. And that is a good way to get in touch with PR people these days and say, hey, this is my thoughts on the game. But again, do so in a respectful way. Don't be an internet troll, because they don't like those.
Right.
So if you can stay respectful, and yeah, there are people too, exactly. So if you can stay respectful, give your feedback. You're allowed. One thing I want to make clear though is you are allowed to express frustration to a certain extent. Like we have a right to quality. We have a right to accessibility the way that we deserve to have it. And so I want to briefly talk about the fact that I infamously kind of went on a Twitter rant against the developers of Gears of War 5.
Okay.
Primarily because of its marketing. because Gears of War 5, when it was on its way out, was marketed as the most accessible shooter of all time. Sounds great, right? Well, the thing is, it is accessible to a lot of other disabilities.
Right.
In many ways, it is the most accessible shooter of all time, probably. But the way that they marketed it is they marketed it alongside Microsoft Xbox's campaign of games are for everyone. And that set an expectation that maybe, just maybe, this game would also be fully blind accessible.
Right.
When the game finally launched, it had incomplete narration, which I've talked about before. Many games have it. And it did have one accessible mode, which even that wasn't fully accessible, but it had one accessibility feature that made it at least playable. But if you wanted to play the story mode, the campaign of the game, you can't play that blind at all.
Right.
There's no accessibility features there at all. So I famously went off on them, and I said, this is not accessible to me at all. What are you trying to pull here? Because this marketing claimed it was going to be the most accessible. So why shouldn't I get excited?
Right. I have the same sort of thing. I had this rant, and it's sad because it's a game I love, a game that I played as a sighted person, and people who have followed my interview series have heard me talk about this before. But it's a game called Out of the Park Baseball, which is a baseball simulation game. You start your team in 1900, and you can play it for 200 years, and you're doing everything, trading players and building up your stadium, and it's just a fun game to play, and completely inaccessible. I mean, like, can't even open up the menus. Randomly though, it did have when it gives you the play-by-play. When I was sighted, it would like voiceover or screen read the play-by-play, how many pitches, who hit, it would read that part. So I was really hopeful that, I'll be able to play this game. It's, they've been thinking about accessibility, but you can't do anything in that game. I literally can't do one thing. They even have a mobile version of the game. So I was like, oh, great. It's on the iPhone. I'm sure that'll be accessible, because it's really just, it's just tables of data, what's the batting percentage, how many triples, doubles, how many strikeouts. I mean, it really is just a table of information. And Football Chairman Pro, which I mentioned earlier, I mean, that's basically the same thing, but with soccer, and they managed to do it. So I went on a rant on them, in email and reviews, just because I love this game, and it's the national pastime, and the blind community is used to being able to follow baseball. It's one of the few things you can follow, by listening to it on the radio and have someone describe what's happening, and yet it's the one sport that seems like we don't have an accessible version to play in any sort of format, and it just drives me insane. So hopefully somebody developer will tune into my video series and just hear me complain. And it's mostly just from love. It's from love. I love the game. I want to play it. Is Gears of War the game that's you wish you could play that you can't, or what game is out there that's kind of the holy grail, or your white whale of I wish I could play this game, but it's just not accessible.
Oh wow, there's so many. There's so many.
That's okay.
Gears of War, it's not a series that I necessarily grew up with in the sense that I'm not as familiar with it as some others. Mm-hmm. But I've always been a big fan of role-playing games. That's my big thing. I would want to play. I think the games I still ache to play are those giant 300-hour RPGs that you can just get lost in forever. Yeah. Like The Witcher 3, or the Dragon Ages, or the Skyrims.
I was about to make you feel bad, because I was like, oh, all of those are great games, because I got to play. I got to play those all sighted. You're really missing out.
But that's my whole thing, though. I love giant stories filled with lore, and I love that kind of stuff. And I really just want to drown in a game like that. I mean, I do. We do have World of Warcraft Classic now, thanks to accessibility mods, right. But I want a single player RPG. Like, I mean, I'm loving my time in World of Warcraft, absolutely loving it. But I still want a single player RPG that I can just spend my own time in and just drown in for hours and hours and hours. And we just don't have one yet. we have RPGs, audio RPGs, but they're none of them are on that scale.
Right.
None of them.
You know what I think would be helpful. So Fallout 4, they had a perk when you leveled up, and I forget what it was called. It was called like the tracker or something like that. But you could turn it on, and it would do like a big yellow line that you could follow to get to your destination, you know, whatever the next quest item was, right? So if you weren't really sure where you needed to go, you could, you know, I don't know, press the, you know, 2 bumper buttons, and the big yellow line would be on for, you know, 10 seconds, and you'd be like, oh, I'm supposed to go that way. But you could just keep spamming and doing it and taking it all the way to your destination. I feel like, you know, all right, they already know how to do that. All you have to do is be like, now I just want to follow the yellow line, you know, as almost like you're on a railroad track, you know what I mean? And you know, then enemies will pop up or whatever, and you could, you know, auto aim to those or whatever. But I feel like, you know, there's got to be a way to leverage that. I used that all the time, even before I lost my sight, just to be like, I don't want to think about where I have to go. Just
I just want to go and do it.
There's supposed to go up those stairs.
There's definitely the seed of an accessibility feature there.
Yeah.
But I think the one caveat there that I would bring up is the fact that as an accessibility feature, if they actually did that, we would need access to it from the start. No questions asked. Like that could not be a perk that you get later on. We would need that from the beginning of the game. So you know,
that was you had to level up. You know, you got it fairly early on, or you could get it fairly early on. Because I actually saw that, I was like, oh, I'm doing that right away. Save me time.
It is a great idea.
Now, so we got a lot of games that you know, you still wish you could play, but. And maybe it's one of the ones that you already mentioned, but I mean, what has been your favorite or best accessibility gaming experience? I mean, was it Last of Us? Was it getting through the laser beams, or is it some other one?
I have to. I mean, I know I talk about it a lot. I'm well aware, but I have to say it's Last of Us 2.
Yeah.
Just because it brought home the dream that I had of, you know, it seems like, you know, to the sighted, this probably seems like such a simple thing because you have access to all the games in the world, and lucky you. But to me, what The Last of Us 2 did was allow me to, for the very first time, play a AAA game for my fiance rather than the other way around.
Right.
And we actually did that. We did a playthrough that I did just for her, because it was the role reversal that we always wanted, where it was me playing the game for her instead of her playing the game because I couldn't play it. I mean, she could play it, but she wanted me to play it for her first to give to, you know, so we could have that experience.
Right.
And having been not only doing that in the first place, like, you know, I've heard plenty of stories. I've gotten a lot of letters since The Last of Us 2 came out about people who have, you know, have their stories with that game. And you know, people who loved it for whatever reason, and gaming couples who came back to gaming because of Last of Us Part 2, which, you know, blows my mind every time I get one of those stories. But anyway, I've gotten those stories, and I'm totally down with that. But to not only do that playthrough for my fiance, but to also have been a part of creating that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Those things combined together, like, that's an experience that I'll never lose that, you know.
No, that's special. And like you said, and to see it showing up, you know, in other games, you know, it's proliferating and growing, you know, the work that you started there. I mean, that is great.
Pretty great.
Now you are doing something fun this weekend. I wanted to give you a little time to talk about this. This is, like I said, I know we interviewed somebody else who made mention of it, but why don't you tell people what you're doing this weekend and what you hope to be holding up at the end of the weekend?
Hey, I mean, if with any luck. Anyway, I am part of the Cento Showdown tournament. It is season 3 of Cento Showdown, which is a blind-only Mortal Kombat tournament. Only blind players allowed. And I am part of that tournament. I was part of it the first year that it happened, that took place 2 years ago, and I'm part of it this year again. It is taking place on July 9th and 10th. I believe there were 21 total participants this time, so I have a bigger pool to get through. Mm-hmm. But the first year, I did not win the first season, but I did get to 5th place
out of 16. You said, right? So that's
out of 16.
Good.
Yeah, out of 16. So my goal is, if I have the power, I would love to break top 4. I don't need to win. I want to show up to support the tournament and to bring my people to it and show support in that way. But I would love to break the top 4 at least. If I win, great, but I kind of doubt it because some of those players are amazing.
So on the other end, any of the 21 like cannon fodder?
I mean, I don't want to say that about anyone. Like, these are people I know, you know.
As anyone like, I've actually never played Mortal Kombat, but I'm going to go enter and see how I do.
Okay, I will say that to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
I don't think anyone in the tournament has never played Mortal Kombat before. I think all the people that have entered are people that have at least played it since it launched. Not necessarily like, you know, religiously played it, but at least played it enough that they know how to play the game. They know how at least one character works, you know. I think I could safely say that. I don't think there's any newcomers to Mortal Kombat in the tournament, but you know, there are some who have played it less than others have, which is fine, you know. Ultimately it's about having fun.
I can't tell you how many times in Mortal Kombat where, you know, it tells you finish him, and I'm pressing buttons and I end up just like kicking the guy in the knee because that's all I can figure out how to do.
Or just like poking him in the face.
Right.
Like,
I can't figure out the combination to do anything good. So I have plenty of you know, lame finishes in that game.
I love my fatalities.
Yeah,
and these days they have the brutality system too, where if you end the match with certain moves, those moves turn into death moves instead, and they create some brand new effect. And I love doing that. Especially so my main character is Liu Kang in Mortal Kombat, and he has a brutality now where his bicycle kick can just end up, you know, ending with the top half of you flying away, flying off.
Bloody pole.
It's just great. I love doing that. I love ending a match that way.
Nice. So, you know, just kind of in closing, I always like to we started with you telling us about yourself, but I always like to kind of close the interview out with, you know, just any final thoughts you have about accessibility, about gaming, about, you know, what the community can do to advocate and elevate accessibility, you know, just any final thoughts that you might have.
Yeah, gaming is at least to me, it is escapism. It is a wonderful form of entertainment. It is perhaps the greatest form of entertainment, capable of portraying the greatest stories because they're interactive, because you're taking control of that character. And it is something that I want to bring to everyone that I can. It's something that I want to, you know, my goals are genre based. I want to bring people experiences they don't have yet. So to all the gamers out there, know that I'm working for you. Know that I'm trying my best to get as much work as I can to get that done. But at the same time, know that you're welcome to join the fight as well. You know, be active on social media. Talk about your experiences. Be kind, but be clear. If you need to go on a rant, do so respectfully as well. You can do that. It is possible. But make your feelings known. Make sure, if you're frustrated, make sure that frustration comes through. Just not to a degree of trollishness that would get you banned from anywhere.
Right, sure.
But, you know, get your voices out there, and you know, really, we're all fighting for this. So if you can get work consulting on accessibility, absolutely take it. You know, that's my encouragement. If you believe you can do it, then go for it. Start getting your voice out there in whatever way works for you. Blog, social media, YouTube videos, all of it. I met someone recently who was extremely passionate and wanted to start making audio reviews of games, and is very clever about it. He showed me one of the things that he did, and I like it a lot. He inserted clips of game dialogue in funny places to make the review entertaining. And you know, that works for me. I really enjoyed that. So get those out there too, and you know, do the best job you can, whatever you choose to do, and get that in the hands of developers however you can, even if it's just sending their community managers a message on Twitter and say, hey, check this out, I made this thing, whether it be a blog post or a review, and most of the time they'll get it to the right people. So, you know, that's how it begins.
Absolutely. And, you know, we in our, you know, the community, we wish you all the success, because as you said, you're in the room, you're advocating for us. So if you're successful, it's going to be successful for all of us. I really encourage everybody everybody to follow all your social media. Again, I will post links to the, the Twitters and the Discords and on just wherever you are out there on the interwebs. I will post that in the links to the description of this YouTube video. And again, I really appreciate you, spending the time talking to us about accessibility, about your experience in mobile gaming, as well as the AAA. Again, I see a bright future, and I see a lot of that bright future coming from people like you who are advocating on our behalf. So again, thank you for all the hard work. Thank you for participating in the interview series. And again, feel free to come back anytime, tell us what you're up to so we can share it with the community.
Oh, I'm sure I'll be back. I'm sure of it.
All right. Great. Thanks. Thank you.